Hello, everyone. My name is Kentrey Brown, and welcome to my presentation on the life of Martin Luther King Jr. For those of you who don't know, Martin Luther King Jr. was a powerful and influential civil rights leader during the civil rights movement who made his mark on America and still finds a way to this day. To the upbringing of his early life, Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929, to the parents Martin Luther King Sr. and Alberta and William Kings. The King family resided in Atlanta, where the King's father was a pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where King's upbringing was deeply rooted in black ministry. King would later go on to attend Morehouse College, where he would spend the summer on a tobacco farm in Connecticut. It was here that King was exposed to races mixing peacefully up north, seeing black people have the freedom to eat and drink where they please, deepened his hatred for racial segregation. King began his classes at the age of 15 at Morehouse College, where he was interested in medicine and law. However, much to the pleasure of his father, King decided to enter ministry. King's mentor and college president, Benjamin Mays, was a social activist who was committed to fighting racial equality and felt that the black community was satisfied with the oppression going on in the community. After graduating in 1948, King spent the next 3 years King spent the next 3 years at Crozer Theological Seminary, located in Chester, Pennsylvania. It was here that he was exposed to Gandhi's belief in nonviolence, and King was renowned for his organization skills and later elected as Crozer's student body president. Once he graduated, he enrolled in Boston University, where his theological ideas began to take off. During this time, King would meet Coretta Scott, who was a native Alabamian studying music at the New England Conservatory of Music, and the couple later would marry in 1953, having 4 children. About About a year into his pastoral services at Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church, a group of civil activists had become frustrated with the segregation taking place in Montgomery's public bus system. This became known as the famous Montgomery bus boycott, and the events of December 1st, 1955, where Rosa Parks refused to sacrifice her seat to a white passenger, resulting in her being arrested because of violating segregation laws. Along with Parks, Dr. King, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and Joan Robinson were also arrested in their connection to the boycott. King was the only one prosecuted and quickly convicted and fined. Montgomery chose King as the leader of the bus boycott movement, and King's oratorical skills were a breath of fresh air in the movement of civil unrest. 1 year later, the Montgomery City buses would be desegregated. Seeing the success of this boycott, Dr. King knew more needed to be done and would then go on to establish the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which would provide him with a base of operation amongst the South and give access to the rest of the nation. King went around the country with other civil rights leaders discussing racial issues affected during the black community. Dr. King, who was known for his belief in nonviolence to achieve the main goal, in February 19, excuse me. Dr. King, who was known for his belief in nonviolence to achieve the goal, in 1959, King and group leaders were welcomed with open arms to the Indian Prime Ministry. There, they would talk on the discussion of Gandhi's followers and his concept of peaceful non-compliance. This helped convince King that nonviolent resistance would be the most successful. He would go on to organize many more movements in the name of nonviolence and also in the name of desegregation. Moving on to Reverend King's catalog, his awards, his writings, things of that nature. One of the most famous of his writings would be, excuse me, one of his most famous literary works would be the Letters to Birmingham Jail, which he wrote while he was incarcerated in the Birmingham jail due to his various things within desegregation, violate many laws at the time. One of his most famous speeches would be the I Have a Dream speech. I'm sure not only just African Americans, but there's not many people who have not at least heard of the I Have a Dream speech once in their lifetime from Mr. Martin Luther King Jr. Another famous one Also be the I've Been to the Mountaintop, which is one of his most famous sermons. Some of the awards that he has acquired over the years as an NAACP medal in 1957. He won the Most Outstanding Personality of the Year by Time Magazine in 1957. He's also received the John F. Kennedy Award in 1964 and one of the most prestigious awards a man can be offered, the Nobel Peace Prize, October 14th, 1964. These are just a few of his accomplishments. As you can see, he won several more throughout his lifetime and even after death. Ideals that Dr. King lived by. Nonviolence was a huge part of Dr. King's teachings. Black church and religion had a major influence on civil rights movements. However, the church's turn the other cheek approach was something that the black community was becoming rather frustrated with. Unlike his peers, Dr. King took on the belief that nonviolence, like peaceful protests, would be more effective. The Montgomery bus boycott was the perfect example of this, as it was a means of nonviolent protest, which would gain headway for the desegregation movement. During this protest, King received a death threat as well as had his house firebombed. Even then, Dr. King refused to give in to the violence and would go on to lead several more nonviolent excursions. King was big on social justice, as he believed it was a huge part of the civil rights movement. It was important to the civil rights movement that black people were treated fairly, just like our Caucasian counterparts. When King was little, he was first exposed to the differences between black people in the North and in the South. He would write home to his parents, Negroes and whites go to the same church. Seeing that white people and black people could live in the same sort of harmony in public was new to him, and that experience gave Dr. King the leeway he needed to stand tall in his beliefs. One of King's first civil protests was the Montgomery bus boycott. This peaceful protest, although it took a year, got the point across and would lead to a very effective result. This made the city wake up and realize that they needed their black clientele, resulting into the desegregation of the Montgomery City bus project transportation. King was a big advocate for nonviolent protests, and the bus boycott made it possible for the city to get social justice for the main problem at hand. After the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, it was evident to King that he needed to platform to reach broader audiences to have more success in getting the change to black communities. By setting up the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King was able to go around to multiple communities and speak with other civil rights leaders about issues related to race. According to Britannica, King looked to Africa for inspiring, stating, "The liberation struggle in Africa has been the greatest single international influence on American Negro students. The fact that Africans were able to come together and break from the chains of colonialism, then they should be able to be freed of the shackles of racism they receive in the United States. It is so important for people to know that change does not come easy. A lot of times it's easier to achieve goals such as racial and social equality when we all come together as one and work to reach the common goal, create a better environment for African Americans." Although equality also coincides with social justice, it also can't stand alone as one of the civil rights movement is. King fought every day for the equality of his people, whether it be through boycotts, marches, or sit-ins. King would do what it took to ensure the safety and quality of his people. The marches from Selma to Montgomery were organized in protest to block black African Americans' ability to vote due to the racist structure of the still very present Jim Crow laws. Selma marches were a series of 3 marches, the first attempt leading to a Bloody Sunday, where the peaceful protesters were brutally attacked by the police, their dogs, and water. The second attempt was known as Turnaround Tuesday, as the group ended up having to turn around and retreat until they had the ability to try again. In the third and final attempt, the marchers were able to reach the Capitol. These marches were a crucial part of the civil rights movement as Dr. King and the marchers successfully achieved their goal. And when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was presented before Congress and eventually signed by President Johnson in 1965, this would be a pivotal moment for the civil rights movement, as voting was actually equal and not just accessible to white people who control most of the politics in the area. Desegregation. Segregation was one of the main issues during the civil rights movement, from colored only water fountains, black schools segregated from white schools, and segregated bus systems. It was important to desegregate the South, especially in Alabama, which we are the civil rights movement a focal point of. In 1963, King stated in his Birmingham campaign launched by Southern Christian Leadership Conference, these sit-ins, these sit-ins were meant to protest the city's segregation policy. The protest landed many of its participants in jail, including Dr. Martin Luther King, where he wrote his famous and previously mentioned The Letter from Birmingham Jail. It was not only for the public, but was also specifically aimed at the 8 clergymen in the hopes that they would see how disappointed he was in their actions. Criticisms of Dr. King. In the rhetoric of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail, Wesley Mott discusses the rhetoric and tone that Dr. King uses in his letters and the tools he uses to invoke emotion and Mott brings awareness to the style that King uses when he addresses his audience in this letter. He states that the letter has proved to be one of King's most eloquent utterances, and much of its power and few defects arises from the same radical elements that he employed in his oral address. Mott also states that King retains the emotional power that is the trademark of the Negro sermon, while he overcomes the flaws that hinder the utility of the sermon in the political and literary sphere. Being a pastor, King was used to giving sermons on Sunday. He had to capture the minds of his audience every Sunday and pull them out and allow them to relate the story at hand. Mott talks about how King introduces himself and makes himself appear more relatable to his audience. He also brings out that King introduces us to himself by saying he is confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, and at the same time gains the interest of 8 clergymen by stating those men of genuine goodwill will be in patient and reasonable terms. Mott highlights that this is an open letter to not only the black community but clergy. Mott shows that kings knew how to look for humility in a situation while also pointing out the inhumanity of the. His breakdown by Mott highlights King's great oratory skills that allowed him to communicate and hold offices in the way that he did. A lot of times when you think about social activists, you start to see them as heroes, take humanity away from that person. Eugene Genovis looks the papers of Martin Luther King Jr., Volume 2, Rediscovering Precious Values, July 1951 through November 1955. Genovis gives us his opinion on King's relationship with God and religion as a whole, as well as why he was in school. Genovis looked at King's papers from Morehouse and can identify the struggle King may have experienced to find God and the Christian worldview. He also states in particular, it revealed a young man determined to substitute a religious faith grounded in science and reason for what he perceives as the naive orthodoxy of the Black Baptists among whom he grew up. He also mentioned King's uneasiness when it came to liberalism he was experiencing and would often drew back toward the faith from ancestors and neighbors as it felt like a safe space. He also goes on to bring up something that I never heard of, plagiarism, within a lot of King's papers in college. Genova states that King plagiarized constantly, blatant, and on a grand scale, and he got away with it. He also goes on to state that his professors were aware of his plagiarism and how Dr. King sometimes had a difficult time understanding the true meaning of what he was writing and learning about before copying these ideas, and not realizing that until it was too late. He also feels that King tirelessly preached the Christian ethics without Christian love generates self-righteous attack on the sinners as readily as on the sin, if not indeed not more so. However, he does acknowledge that King practiced when he preached. He stated that King confronted the most complexing problems of our age and led a heroic effort to solve them in a manner worthy of civilized nations. While it's clear that King's relation with theology, his upbringing with his pastor father and grandfather muddied the waters for him a little, he still achieved great amounts due to his intellect. In my personal opinion, I believe that Dr. King played such a pivotal role in the civil rights movement and its success. The King was able to show the black community that when we come together, we can get an extraordinary amount of things done. He also showed us that because others use violence against us, violence does not have to be incited to make change. One of Dr. King's principles that I do have some conflict with is his stance on nonviolence. On one hand, protesting peacefully more significant, can have more significance and bring about more change. However, on the same note, peaceful protest does not always work. Sometimes it's showing people that you mean what you say for them to actually take you serious and not as a joke. I think there were a lot of instances that King could have put up more of a fight against his enemies. Allowing your enemies to send you death threats and firebomb your house when you have a family protector is not something that I could necessarily do or agree with. He gave his enemies that idea that they could get away with doing this because they know that you are not going to do anything about the situation. In my opinion, Bloody Sunday did get out of hand. While being non-violent is something that should be practiced and can be applied to many situations, sometimes you have to look out for and protect not just yourself, but those around you. Here's the bibliography page for any of citations for any of my work. I do appreciate you all for taking the time to watch and study this presentation, and I hope you all learned something today. Thank you.